Hello, my name is Jason. This is a class on virtual film production in Blender. Let's get started. When you first open Blender, you're going to see a splash screen. Just click off of that. You'll see a cube, a camera, and a light. Let's hit A for all and X to delete. We're going to start off by making sure we have a very important add-on enabled. I know that the Blender screen here can be very confusing, a little scary. I think I just closed it the first time I opened it. But we're going to take it one step at a time and learn one little trick and tool at a time. So go up to Edit, go to Preferences, click on Add-ons. Up here in the search bar, just search for Images, and you'll see Images as Planes. Just make sure that is checked, and then we'll be able to get started. Because the thing that Blender does here is it uses images as planes in the 3D space. So a plane, as you know, is just a rectangle. We can hit Shift A and hit Add to add a plane. And so what we have is a rectangle here. If you could just put your picture or your video onto that plane, then you can have a video in the 3D world and you can have it interact with the objects around it. That way you can have a virtual camera that has a relationship to it, that you can create your film entirely in the virtual world. That's exactly what we want to do. But using images as planes, so let's hit Shift A, go to Image, Images as Planes, and load up the footage that I'm going to include a link for below. For this first project, we'll be making this very simple little scene here with two people doing simple yoga poses in front of a picture that's a backdrop, and we're going to incorporate a little camera movement and then a texture of leaves that's breaking up the lighting, and it kind of helps blend the footage of the actors into the scene overall. This is an extremely simple scene, but it's a great place to start to get the basic elements. When you open up the folder with the keyed assets, you'll see that each folder contains many image files instead of a video file. We're going to hit A and select all of those and hit Animate Image Sequence. The reason we want to import every single frame as a frame instead of the whole thing as a video is so that we can have more control over each individual one. After we hit Animate Image Sequences, we're going to hit Emit, put 0.1, and hit OK. Import images as planes. Blender has multiple ways to view things. Right now we're in solid view, but this is wireframe view. To see what is on the plane, we want to go to rendered view. I'm going to hit R to rotate, X, and I'm going to type in 90 degrees. There's our video that we're going to start off with, and we can see right away if we hit the space bar that she's moving a little bit. Down along the bottom here you can see the playback bar. These controls should be pretty self-explanatory, but I'll just say this one takes you back to the beginning. So let's just start right there. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Hitting Shift, right-click will let me move the 3D cursor. That's this red and white thing. Wherever you have that, that's where you're going to add new things in. So I'm going to hit Shift A and add a camera. If I go up here, I can go into the camera view. You can see I can't see much, and if I scroll away, I get out of the camera view. I don't want that. So let's go back into the camera view, scroll forward to zoom it in a bit. I'm going to hit N, or you can go up here to this little thing right there and get the individual data of this thing. So if you go to view while you're in the camera, if you go to view and hit camera to view, that will lock the camera to your view. That way, when you use your middle mouse button to scroll around now, you can see the camera outline border is coming along with you. So now we have control over the camera. Wherever we're looking right now, the camera. And then if I click camera again, that little icon, I get out of that view, and there's the camera, this funky triangle thing. Yeah, so let's click back into the camera for a second. This is basically where we want our camera to be. But if we go up here to Item, and we have over here in the right-hand bar, Camera selected, then the item that we're talking about is the camera. So we want to make sure our rotation is 90, and then these two, you can hold and drag over them to select them both. Just make those 0, so we know that our camera is shooting straight on, and its relationship to the world around it is the default. So right away we can see that our footage here is also centered. That's because the 3D cursor was in the center of the world when we started. What does that mean? Well, there's a Cartesian plane here, and the red line represents the x-axis, the green line is the y. So if I select the footage I hit G to grab, and then I type Y, then I can move that footage on the Y-axis. If I hit GX, I can move it on the X-axis. I want to move this up a little bit, so I'm going to hit GY, move it forward. I'm going to hit Shift-S. That's going to bring up this cursor menu. That's Shift-S. And then you can take cursor to the world origin. So you can see that cursor just went to where the green and the red intersect. Let's bring in some more stuff to play with. Shift-A, Image, Images as Planes. And we'll go back to our folder here. So that was standing yoga. Let's bring in sitting yoga. I'll hit A to select all those frames. Animate image sequence is checked. Emit 0.1. That just means that the video itself is putting out light. If it wasn't, it would appear to be all black. R to rotate, X to rotate on the X-axis, and then hit 90 degrees. Now we have two things. It looks like they're gray, but if we go into the camera view, you can see both of them. But they're in a weird relationship. The orange outline tells me I have that one selected, so G to grab, Z to move on the Z-axis, which is up and down, and then GX, I'll move it over there, and I'll move it towards us a little bit, GY, and then move your mouse. That's a good starting point for now. So our basic scene that you can see right here is starting to unfold. Let's go ahead and put in the background image, so Shift-A, Image, Images as Planes. We're going to look for that background image wherever you might have saved that. So now in the camera view, we can see our elements here starting to all come together. It's looking a little dark, and we're going to add some lighting. So now that I have this image basically in the right place, I'm going to hit S to scale it up. And you can see the dotted line is what the camera will see in our render. So let's just scale it up a little bigger than that. Great. The next thing for us to do is to add a light in here. I'm going to bring the 3D cursor. So if I shift right click, the 3D cursor moves to that point. And that's where you'll input whatever you're going to import. So if I hit Shift A and add a light, I'm going to add let's add a spot. So you can see that this light just got imported, but it's not lighting up anything. Let's select one of these objects and look at the way the image is being applied to the surface of the plane. If we go to shading up here at the top, we can look at what's going on here. In the bottom panel here, if we scroll in, this thing on the left, that's the video itself, each individual frame, the number of frames, the start frame, and the offset. You can see that the color, which is the image itself, is being fed into emission. If you remember, we plugged it into emit 0.1. We also want to plug the color into the base color here. And right away, you can see up here that the light took effect. We want to do that for each of these objects. Plug the color into the base color so that we can get a little bit of lighting from the scene itself. Emitting is helpful because it lets the things stand out and have a presence of their own. But if they emit too much, or if they don't have a base color, which is the color that's being applied within the 3D world, then they won't respond to the lighting around it. All right, here we are. So we can see that we're making progress. We can select our light here, go back to lighting and turn it down a bit. And more. A lot of it is memorizing arbitrary places to change things and then changing things more and more until you get kind of what you want. Great. I'm going to go up here to the top and select Eevee. We don't need cycles for what we're doing right now. These are the rendering engines that Blender can use, and Eevee is much, much faster. It is not as complex when you're doing volumetrics or complex shadows or rendering many, many 3D objects. But luckily for us, since we're working with flat footage and flat images right now, it almost makes no difference at all which one you use. And so Eevee being much, much faster, it's going to be better for us to use this one. But it will change all of the light values and things like that. So let's select the light, go back to lights. Let's bring it back up a bit. So you can see there's a black outline right here being cast onto our background. That's because our planes are casting shadows. Even though we can see through them, they're casting a shadow on the objects behind them, which is bad. Let's go down here to, what is that, surface? Material properties. Great. Scroll all the way down until you get to settings. And we're going to look for, so alpha blend in the blend mode. So the alpha is like where there's something, like the person, that's an alpha of 1. And where there's nothing, that's an alpha of 0. So you can imagine this as a black to white gradient, where there's nothing to where there's something. So alpha blend is helping us see through the image. If we set it to opaque, then it is black to white. So alpha blend is good, but you can see down here shadow mode, that wants to be set to alpha hashed. And that way the lighting can go through the thing. This one back here, the sitting yoga, wants to be the same way, alpha hashed. And right away you can see that now that video is casting a shadow of itself onto the background, which is very cool. I'm going to set our blend modes to alpha clip because it makes it have a little bit more substance and stand out. You can see how that one was, you might have seen when I moved it around, it kind of blended into the background. We want it to stand out where the alpha is positive. So let's go back into the camera. How are we doing? We are much, much closer to our sample video. And it's setting up the arbitrary stuff like this that is how you get started. It's kind of the tedious part that you just have to memorize. A lot of the rest of it is just making artistic choices, trying things, and using trial and error. I'm going to move our light on the y-axis so that it's not hitting our backdrop there. I'm going to move both of our videos forward so that they are both in the light. I'm going to go into shading up here, and I'm going to change the color relationship of these two things. So what does that mean? Well, you can see that the foreground video is very, very faded, whereas in the background there's a lot more saturation. If we go into shading, we go to Shift A. So what you're seeing here in this view is the node editor of shading. And what that means is, as I said before, this image is being fed into the shader. And the shader is turning that into something that can be output onto the surface of the plane that we've added into the 3D world. So we can affect almost every characteristic of how this all looks from the shader editor. So if I hit Shift A and go to search, just like we might in the layout view, I'm going to type in hue, saturation, and drop this node right on this line. It will snap in between those two places so that anything we do here goes from the image through that and gets spit out differently into the shader itself. So right away you can see we could make it much darker. We could change the saturation. So let's drop the value a little bit and increase the saturation. Already that is helpful. Yeah, that's a much better view. So that is looking much more realistic. Now if I can select the other image and do exactly the same thing, Shift A, hue. This one, I think we want to drop the saturation, increase the brightness. That's a good starting point. Now we're getting a little closer. In the shader view, you can also click on the camera and see what you would get. But again, you would need to hit N or go up here, hit view and lock camera to view. Because each of these tabs up here operates independently from the settings that you would have. Okay. So this is starting to look pretty good. Now all we have to do is refine what we have. We want to have lighting in the scene that will affect the backdrop and make it look more realistic, and that will affect our figures here and be able to cast that dappled foliage texture that you can see in the final product video. So what we're going to do is we're going to treat this image of the background kind of just the same way that photographers have been doing for years. We're going to turn this into a photography background. And so if you look up here at the top left where it says object mode, if you select an object, it could be a plane like this, it could be a cube. So if I hit Shift A, cube, we have a cube and it's in the light. What we can do is we can hit Tab and you can see it turns into edit mode, or you can go up here and change it yourself. And you can alter the geometry of this object in any kind of way that you may want to do. So we can do that with our image as planes. That's the value of what we're doing here, is putting these pictures and videos into a 3D world where we can change them to do different stuff. In order to make this more like a photography backdrop, we need to turn this one plane into many little planes so we can treat it more like a piece of fabric. So I'll tab into edit mode. I will hit Control R, which creates a loop cut, and then scroll up my mouse wheel until I have a whole bunch of lines there. Then I'll just right click. So with these objects in Blender, they're made up of vertices, which are individual points. And if you hit, while you're in edit mode, if you hit 1 on your top row here on your keyboard, you'll be in vertex mode. That means you could grab a vertex and you could move it around. And you could do anything with vertexes that you might want. If you hit 3, you'll be in face mode, so you can grab a plane or a face. And if you hit 2, you'll be in edge mode. So instead of a vertex or a face, you'll be grabbing a line. And if we grab the bottom line there, the bottom edge, then we go up here to the top where it says proportional editing. What that means is when I move that one, it'll move some other ones. So now, when I hit G, you can see a big circle appears. And if I scroll my mouse wheel, it changes in size. So if I hit G, I already have, and I hit Y, that means it'll only move on the Y. But now you can see when I move it, the whole picture moves. I want to scroll that down because I don't want the, I want the ground of this image to move, but I don't want the water and the background and all that stuff to move. So I'm going to move it just a little bit. But you can see if I had moved down here that it's not looking the best. I'm going to rotate that edge, rotate on the x-axis. I'm going to grab it, Y, and move it down here like that, and grab it, Z. And I'm just going to adjust each of these to be kind of more like what I want. And as you can see, that's turning it into like a photography background where there's the floor and the back and it all goes together. That's what you would find in a photographer's studio. But I'm going to keep making some adjustments until we get more of what we want. And we also don't want the image to stretch any more than it really needs to. All right, so what are we getting in the camera now? That's not bad. That looks pretty good. I think maybe it's more than what we need. So let's bring it back. So just by controlling the amount of proportional editing, you can control how much the other things are moving in relation to the thing you're moving. And once you've done this for a while, you can get the hang of it. But yeah, great. And so now you can kind of see it's a little faceted. I'm going to right click and hit Shade Smooth. So that way all those little faces, they appear to blend into each other. Right. I'm going to grab the camera, G, Y, move it back a bit. There we go. Not bad. And I'm going to grab our backdrop. Sometimes you got to click through, and I'm just going to scroll it up. Scroll it up some more so we have plenty. I wonder if the camera is rotated. Yeah, so my camera got moved when I moved some stuff. So I'm going to bring that back so we can get a good relationship to our backdrop here. With the outline of the camera, you want everything to be covered. You don't want to see this in your render, right? So Control Z just to undo. So now we're getting somewhere. We can even see that the shadow of our footage here is landing on the ground, which is cool. If you can use your footage to cast its own shadow, that's really, really helpful. It looks really good. Now I just want to move this footage around until it feels like it's in the right place for what I need. You can scale it up, you can move it closer. The thing to ask yourself is the relationship between how close it is, the footage that you're using, and the lights. That's what it really comes down to. At this point, we can hit the space bar and sort of see haltingly what the video is going to look like. And it's not too bad. Now the only thing left to do is to make minor adjustments to lighting so that things fit into the world. We can make some shadows that these figures are casting onto the ground, and we can make a foliage shadow for the world around them to kind of tie them all together. In order to make some shadows that would be the shadow that they are casting onto the ground, I'm going to go into camera view because the real relationship between these objects is not going to be correct, right? This figure is way out here in front of the ground, and that doesn't matter. In fact, all the movies that you watch have stuff like this when they are compositing things together. It doesn't really work anyway except for in the camera. And so for us, our virtual camera, we're going to make everything work in our virtual camera. I'm going to shift right click to bring the cursor over there, hit shift A, mesh, and add a plane. And I'm going to scale it so that it is kind of the same size and shape as this yoga mat she's standing on. I'm going to kind of bring it right down there. I'm going to select our light here, go into the light setting, and click on shadows. I'm going to turn on contact shadows, and if you turn that off and on, you can see that it's making a shadow appear under the plane. It just makes shadows able to appear really close. And it doesn't really work otherwise. There's, especially in Eevee, this render engine, there's a little bit of a gap. That's one of the things that makes it a little faster. So we want to use this to cast a shadow onto the world itself, where we would think there would be a shadow for this yoga mat. So we can scale by the X, we can scale by the Y. But ultimately, we don't really want to see this this plane here. So we're going to go into, what is it? Texture properties? Material properties. Hit new just so we get some options. Go down here and click alpha blend for that as well. But we're going to leave the shadow mode as opaque. That means the shadow will stay, but the alpha will blend. So if we come up here to where it says alpha, pull it down to 0, you can see the object has disappeared, but the shadow is still there. So we can move it around until we're getting the shadow that we really want. That's okay for now. We're going to do the same thing for the other piece of footage. I'm going to right click to bring the cursor more over there. And since she's sitting up, I'm going to add a circle. Now for a circle, it's not a solid object. For some reason in Blender it doesn't appear as a solid object just like the plane does. We're going to hit Tab, go into edit mode, and we're going to hit F to add a face. So all of those, let me just Control Z for a second. If I hit 1, you can see all the little points that make up this circle. And we're in edit mode, so I can hit F and it will add a face. That's all. So if I go back into camera mode, we can position that so that, oh, we don't need to be in edit mode anymore. We can position that so that the shadow that we're getting is the shadow that we really want. That's not bad. Great. Let's call it there. We'll do the same thing. In texture properties or material properties, we'll add a texture. We'll turn it to alpha blend and make the alpha be 0. So if we click off of that, she has a nice shadow. She has a nice shadow. And the thing that's really hurting us now is I turned that emission up. So let's select the background object, or you can go up here and find it. It's named after its file name. Let's go back to shading. Let's turn that emission down. It's kind of hurting us, I think. You can see the shadows all got quite a bit darker there. Let's see what happens if we turn it down again. Sometimes it's just trial and error on what you're getting versus what you want. Out of the camera view, we're going to add a big plane. So I'm going to shift right click to move the 3D cursor. Let's move it up there. Shift A, mesh, plane. Let's scale it up so that it's totally blocking the light. We're going to want to move this light a little higher so that it can be affected by this plane, because what we're going to do is we want a foliage texture like leaves. We want this light to cast the shadow of a bunch of leaves onto our whole scene here. And right now, this plane is casting its whole big shadow, right? I hit H to hide it, Alt H to bring it back. It's casting a giant shadow. But how would we make it disappear? We would do that alpha thing, right? Well, we can do something similar, but we can use a noise texture to make its alpha be not just disappeared, but some there, some not there. So let's select the object and go into shading. We'll give it a new texture, and we will hit Shift A, search, type in noise. Plug the factor into the alpha, scale it up. We'll be able to look at this in a second. Let's also plug the factor into the base color just to see what's going on. So if I jump out of the camera here, you can see that we've got a noise texture like an old TV. A noise texture is just like an edgeless, seamless texture that you can procedurally change the scale of, change the intensity of, so you can get a lot of different factors. So for instance, I'm going to hit Shift A again, search, and I'm going to look for a color ramp. I'm going to pop that in there. I'm going to plug that into the alpha as well. This color ramp is just a gradient from black to white. But if we grab these things and pull them together, then you can see that it's affecting the contrast of the noise texture. So we want something that's kind of like light coming through the leaves. Let's take a look at that. So how are we doing? If we make sure we have that object selected and go back to material properties, we can see that it's not helping because in blend mode under settings, we want to go to alpha blend. And for shadow, we want to go to alpha clip? No, alpha hashed. So now we sort of have the setup correct. From here, it's just a question of the relationship between the brightness of the light, which we can change by selecting the brightness or selecting the light, and the various, there we go. So if I change the color ramp, you can see it's having an effect on the shadows themselves. And the other thing that is going to affect that is the scale. So if we just type in, let's try 1. The scale of these shadows is going to be greatly affected by the scale here. Yeah. So let's make it, how about 0.1? Too small? Yeah. How about 0.5? Let's go with that. Let's go with 1. Now the other thing is this, that the shadows wouldn't fall onto the background, it wouldn't fall on the water. So if we grab our shadow noise texture maker here, grab it, hit Y, I'm just going to move it so that these shadows are not falling on the water. Kind of put it like right there on the edge. We also don't want our light to be falling on the water either. So let's move that down so that it's only hitting the ground and the figures themselves. Go back to the camera. How's that look? Starting to look pretty good, not so bad. So I think we just need to add another light here. I didn't do this last time, but we're going to add a light that will kind of just light the background world a little bit. You can turn that down. This is a lot of settings and stuff to learn, and the thing is just to watch this video as many times as you need until you kind of get a feeling for it. It's a huge leap to understand all this stuff, but this first session is 90% of the completely arbitrary knowledge that you need. So just learn it, practice it, memorize this stuff, and then everything after that is kind of look at this trick and look at this way to do this thing that you want to do. Cool, so we're looking pretty good here. It looks like we might need to take our other light. So up here you can see all your objects, our first light there. Why don't we make that a little yellowy, just a little bit, kind of like a more natural. Why don't we make it a little brighter, a lot brighter, too yellow. You can control the saturation and the value and the hue right there. It seems like we may have lost our shadow plane a little bit when I moved something. We did. Cool. There we go. by scaling it, moving it around, we can control where it is and how it looks. Great. Our circle shadow. Yeah, not too bad. Okay. So in our camera view, let's hit Control S to save the thing. Let's just save it somewhere. Let's hit F12. F12 is going to produce a render. That's just going to show us what it's going to look like. And we have a problem right away. We saw the image for a second, but what's happening is Blender's trying to help us in a way that's not helpful when we're using Eevee, the fast render engine. Go up here to compositing. You'll see render layers, but you can see there's a problem that should be clear. The image is not connected to anything, and something called denoise is connected to our output. We don't need that, so I'll just hit X to delete it. I'm just going to plug image right into image for now, go back to layout, and hit F12 again. Now we have a nice image here, and this is what the final product would be. F12 is a representation of the render. Not too bad. I think one of our figures is still a little too saturated. I think that we can see the edge of the backdrop here, so that's not looking too great. Why don't we move a few things around? Let's go back into camera view. Let's move our backdrop over just a tad. Let's grab, let's see if we can change the saturation just a little bit there. Instead of changing the saturation, I think I'll try to change the hue, because looking just a little yellow. I don't know if you can see that on your screen, but it made a difference just by taking the hue from 0.5 to 0.49. It changed her from yellowish to a little more reddish. And for this figure, I'm going to try to, what should we do here? Drop the value a little more? That may be too much. Let's keep it like that. So back in the layout, let's hit F12 again. That's looking pretty good. So for our project, I think that there's only one more thing that we want to add, and that's a little camera movement. So at the bottom down here, we can see the playback section, and we can see that Blender defaults to 250 frames, right? If you zoom in and out, you can see there's 250. Come right up here and just put 300. 300, that'll be 10 seconds. Over here on the right-hand bar, the second thing looks kind of like a printer printing out a thing. I don't know. That's output, so it makes sense. Come down here, you can see it's now changed to 300 frames. Make sure your frame rate is 30 frames per second. That's just a good standard for us to be working at in this class. And for output, it's going to try to output to some completely random place. Why don't you change that to some place convenient for you? I'm just going to call this X for right now so I don't get it confused. And for your file format, we're going to, in just this one time, we're going to go ahead and output a video. So we're going to change it to FFmpeg video. We're going to go to encoding. We're going to make an MP4. That's a standard video file. And we're just going to send it to high quality. Why not? We deserve it. So the last thing we want to do before we output this thing is we want to have just a little bit of camera movement. And in camera movement, we're going to go ahead and learn how to do animation. Animation can mean like a character moving, but it can also mean just something is moving along an axis. We're just going to move our camera and rotate it just a little bit. So on the playback thing down here at the bottom, you can see we're on 1. If you were to hit play here, it would start going. You can hit pause. You can go to the end. You can go back. So what we're going to do, we're going to grab our camera. That's what's selected now. We're going to rotate it. So I'm going to hit R, Z. I'm going to rotate it over here. I'm going to hit G to grab and move it on the x-axis so that here at the beginning of our video on frame 1, this is what we see. And since I still have the camera selected, I'm going to hit I. I will help you put a keyframe. So just select location and rotation. So a keyframe is a point in time and space that a thing is away. And the thing that is away is our camera is in this place at this point in time. Now we're going to hit this button just to go to the end of the video. We're going to still have our camera selected. We're going to hit GX, RZ. Ah! GX. That looks pretty good. That's pretty different. So I'm going to hit I again. I'm going to keyframe the location and rotation. Now I can grab this blue thing and just kind of drag back just to make sure, especially that the camera doesn't go off of the backdrop at any point in our video here. And the thing that I'm seeing right now is, even though the quality here that we can see is kind of crappy, is you can see it looks like our figure, she's floating a little bit. What that tells me is that her relationship to the footage is too close to the camera. We need to be able to move both of them back without losing the lighting effect that we're getting. We find that we can move them significantly, but we may have to scale them up. And that's going to mean that we're going to want to readjust our shadows and our lighting. So let's do that. When you're done, you can do a final render, and hopefully it'll look something like this. So that's it for our first project, an introduction to bringing footage and assets into the 3D environment in Blender and setting them up as a video to have a little camera animation that you can create some video footage. In future projects, we're going to be doing much more complex stuff and introducing audio, volumetric fog, blinking lights, and all kinds of things that would let you make basically any kind of film that you would want on a budget that is almost nothing, as long as whatever it takes you to just film your footage and find your assets and create them. So thanks, and I'll see you next time.